Okay. Volume 3, and I've actually got, or Volume 4 and Part 3, but I've got Part 1 already editing, as you can see. A quest for the Gilberta Company. Having now acquired something new to research, Ferdinand once again started holding himself up in his workshop. He would come out only when it was time for me to assist him with his work, and come forth bell when I was no longer helping him, he would immediately lock himself away again. Eckert had started to worry since it had reached a point where Ferdinand was only eating 1 meal a day, but I didn't think it was anything to fret about. That 1 meal a day ensured he could survive at least. Still, I thought he would be long finished by now, Eckert murmured. We'll be moving back to the castle after the spring baptism ceremony, so I say we let him continue his research until then. We aren't too backed up with temple work, and as long as he's not going entirely without food, no one loses from this. I consider it fine for us to let him have a week to himself, I said, while cleaning up my slate board and pen. Far be it from me to deny him when I similarly wanted to spend my days reading in my room. Eckert returned a somewhat dissatisfied glare. Rosamund, you're being surprisingly soft on Ferdinand. Would you put his lust for research over your own brother's struggle having to accommodate it? I'm not being soft on him. This is all for my own sake. Without his research, we will not be able to finish making our clothes for Schwartz and Weiss. I also have my own plans, so I abandoned Eckert and returned to my room. The Gilberta Company were due to arrive this afternoon, so I needed to move to the orphanage director's chambers after lunch. Gil, Fritz, have you prepared what I asked for? Yes, 2 kinds of wax, one viscous and rigid, the other runny and flexible. Heidi's colored ink, and an assortment of miscellaneous goods, such as a pot for hot water, brushes, pens, cloth with resist-dyeing liquid, and some long chopsticks. I had ordered Gil and Fritz to prepare for the Gilberta Company visiting the workshop, as an explanation alone was hardly going to suffice, so I was planning on showing them resist-dyeing firsthand. Thank you both. I will need to rely on you once again when the Gilberta Company arrives. Understood. After a brief pre-meeting discussion, Gil went to meet the Gilberta Company at the gates, while Fritz returned to the workshop. Meanwhile, I sipped up the tea Fran had prepared and checked my room to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. Not long after, Gil returned to the second floor with the Gilberta Company's group. 5 people in total were accompanying him. Otto, Karina, Theo, Leon, and Tully. The moment I made eye contact with Tully, she broke into a smile. That alone filled my heart with joy. She remained my angel now and forever. We have come at your summons, Lady Rosamine. Otto, Karina, and Tully knelt in a row before me, with Theo and Leon kneeling behind them. Theo was more or less Otto's right-hand man. He supported Otto just as unilaterally as Mark did Benno. He and Otto had studied the etiquette necessary for visiting the castle together, so he fit right in here despite not having come very often. Leon was a Laharl at the Gilberta Company and knew me from my Blue Shrine Maiden days. He had used to work with Lutz but stopped going to the workshop once the planting company split from the Gilberta Company, so I hadn't seen him in a long while. The last time I had, he had still looked a bit childish due to not having come of age, but now he looked fully like an adult. After exchanging lengthy noble greetings, I suddenly remembered. After raising my hand to my chest, I smacked my right fist against my left palm. It was a spring greeting for merchants that Benno and Mark had taught me. Since we were here for business, I decided to give it a try. Blessed be the melting of the snow, I said. May the goddess of spring's boundless magnanimities grace you all. Otto blinked in surprise before likewise smacking his fist against his hand. Blessed be the melting of the snow. May the goddess of spring's boundless magnanimities grace you. The other 4 repeated the same merchant greeting after Otto. It felt somewhat strange seeing Tully say it so smoothly. You may sit, I said, gesturing to the Gilberta Company's seats as Fran prepared more tea. There are many orders to be made. Otto, Karina, and Tully sat down while Theo and Leon stood behind them. It wasn't long before the warm aroma of tea started drifting through the air, and it was then that Monica brought in sweets. There were simple cookies for us to eat while discussing business. I demonstratively ate one of each so that the others could start eating as well. Seeing Tully smiling happily at getting to eat sweet stuff satisfied me. Karina, upon noticing that, smiled as well. Lady Rosamine, what orders do you have for the Gilberta Company today? Karina asked, brightly. I am told you need more than just hairpins this time. Oh, I actually didn't realize this at the time, but when Lutz went to go get Tully, and what the seamstress had mentioned that she doesn't come around very much after having, dang it, what was the kid's name? Karina had another baby. During that, that time period that mine was at the academy. So yeah, I didn't know that. Now she has 2 kids. Otto helped pumping them out. A personal chef of mine will be attending this summer's Star Festival. I would like a hairpin for her to wear when the time comes. That said, despite being among my personnel, Ella is still a commoner. A hairpin that looks too expensive would stick out, and I assume it would not suit her outfit to begin with. Indeed. Furthermore, as I brought my personal chefs with me to the Noble's Quarter, Ella was not able to attend her coming-of-age ceremony. This is going to be the first time her parents see her wearing formal clothing, and as I understand it, her husband's parents will also see her during the festival. Tuli, could you prepare a hairpin for a spring-born that would suit her? Tuli knew Ella well since they had taught the orphans to cook together and participated in the pig killing for the orphanage's winter prep. She would doubtless be able to make a hairpin that suited her. Certainly, Tuli replied. I have met Ella and understand what would suit her. That settled that. As far as I could tell from the podium during the winter coming-of-age ceremony the other day, almost every woman was wearing a hairpin, I said. I was impressed to see how far the Gilberta Company's efforts have spread them throughout the city. Tuli gave a modest, proud smile. I also see that the number of women wearing hairpins at ceremonies is increasing by the year. I researched which hairpins are the most popular so that I may make even better ones myself, although I did not see the recent coming-of-age ceremony, since I had to stay with my little brother. Oh! That's what I figured happened. Did something happen to him, I asked, recalling my concern after not seeing Tuli and Camille at the door. I thought they could have been sick. No, it's just that he turns 4 this spring. Taking a toddler to see a ceremony is one thing when you can carry them. He's not old enough that he might rush into the temple if we aren't careful, so we decided to keep him home. Children aren't allowed in the temple before their baptism, Tuli replied. Oh yeah, I remember not being allowed to go when Tuli was baptized. It wasn't something that I had really considered since my family had always carried Camille up to the doors, but children weren't allowed to enter the temple before they were baptized. In short, I wouldn't get to see him again until his own baptism. This sucks. But my parents wanted to see it no matter what, so I volunteered to watch over him. We were lucky it was on an Earth Day when I didn't have to work. We would have been in trouble had it been the coming-of-age ceremony of any other season. Tuli continued with a troubled smile. She had no doubt watched over Camille so that Mom and Dad could see that I really had gotten better. It makes sense. They couldn't leave an almost 4-year-old on his own. It wouldn't be easier for my parents to visit the temple from now on since they couldn't bring Camille, which meant I would get even fewer chances to see them. I don't get to talk to Lutz and the others in the hidden room, and now I don't get to watch Camille grow up either? This is a little sad. Well, no duh. Tuli opened and then closed her mouth, hesitant to speak before finally stealing her resolve and giving me a comforting expression. Lady Rosemine, my father mentioned that he has once again been hired to escort those going to Haas. The soldiers were elated when they heard the news. It truly is one of their favorite assignments. I would like to thank you for your patronage so far. Or for your patronage as well. Her words snapped me back to reality. We were hiring the soldiers to bring the Grey Priest back from Haas, which meant I would get to see Dad at the monastery again. That cheered me up a little. The soldiers Gunter leads are kind even to my Grey Priests and Shrine Maidens, and it is thanks to their consideration that I can trust them with this work. Tell Gunter that I look forward to his good service once more. As he wished, Tuli replied with a relieved smile. It was a right sight that healed my aching heart, and after a moment spent basking in her radiance, I set the sheet of paper with the armband design on it down on the table. Moving on. I would like the Gilberta Company to make these, I said. Everyone leaned forward and peered down at the armband drawings with curious expressions. Lady Rosemine, might I ask what this is? Tuli queried. She spoke with the utmost politeness, but the suspicion in her eyes made it clear that she was asking whether I was about to start something weird again. I personally didn't consider it strange in the slightest, but her general assumption was correct. Armbands were essentially items for members of my library committee. I wrapped the design sheet around my arm. I would like armbands with these characters on them to demonstrate membership to an organization. All members of the library committee will be wearing them. They look a lot like the cloth bands people wear for funerals, Tuli said with a slight frown. I wasn't sure what she was referring to. It must have been another custom from this world. Funerals, you say? Yes, during funerals, those related to the deceased wrap black cloth around their arms. This armband reminds me of it. Oh, I see. I guess it's a little concerning. Hopefully, using a color other than black should avoid any further comparison to funerals. Probably a good idea. Giving up on the armbands entirely wasn't an option. I wanted to be a library committee member, even if only in appearance. I wanted to have matching armbands with Schwartz, Weiss, and Hannelore. The armbands aren't black, and there are going to be characters embroidered onto them, so I don't believe they will feel much like funeral cloths, I said. Armbands have a pin, see, so they lock around the arm. Oh, I suppose I need to have Johann make safety pins. Oh, yeah, good idea. Actually, safety pins also will work well with sewing and making clothes, so that would actually be a good thing to make anyway. I set down the armband paper, took out my diptych, and then scribbled down order safety pins from Johann. I would need to speak to my Gutenbergs about it before leaving for Haldensdale at spring prayer. As my thoughts drifted, Thule pointed at the kanji on the armband with an exasperated look. Lady Rosemine, pardon me, Lady Rosemine, what are these strange designs? Let's say they are collectively the symbol for the library committee that I made up. The armband design you see here is already life-size, so just do the embroidery as you see it. You must not add or remove any lines whatsoever. Yeah, because of kanji, if you make even the slightest change to one by adding, an extra line or an extra dot or something, that could change its meaning completely. We discussed the armbands further, during which I selected the color of the cloth and the embroidery thread that would be used. There were going to be 4 differently colored armbands in total. I wanted the variety so that Hannelore could select her preferred color, so that we could have ones that suited Schwartz and Weiss's new outfits. Furthermore, I wished to order a new hairpin for this summer, I continued. The hairpins are popular even in the Royal Academy. I shall entrust the design to you, Thule. I understood, you may count on me, Thule said, confidently accepting the work order. Dang it. I didn't mean to hit that. I generally entrusted her with designing and selecting the colors for the hairpins. I had complete faith that she would make one that suited me. After finishing my order, I gazed around the others from the Gilberti Company one by one. Otto and Thule tensed up a little, anticipating one last thing. They were sensitive to my more subtle mannerisms after having spent so long with me. And finally, although I have already expressed my gratitude by letter, please allow me to thank you directly. I am incredibly grateful that you accepted such urgent orders in the winter, and the prince was exceedingly satisfied with the hairpin you produced. The Archduke candidate who wore it was truly a sight to behold, and she drew more attention than any other graduating student. I am sure you will be receiving more orders from this point on as well. We are honored. They seem to be suspecting that I was about to drag them around on some unreasonable journey again, and they weren't entirely wrong. I smiled. As a reward for your continued efforts, I would like to present the Gilberti Company with a new technology. Huh? Thule and Otto looked at me with... Oh, the resist die. With surprise, having been caught off guard, Karina tilted her head gracefully, but her eyes were narrowed into the sharp look of a merchant. I wish to express my thanks for you completing an order from royalty, a truly unreasonable demand, but perhaps you would rather not receive it? If so, I would ask to be introduced to the Dyeing Guild. Not at all, we will gratefully accept it. Good God. I wasn't lying when I said that I wanted to express my thanks to the Gilberti Company, but in truth, I just wanted to get resist dyeing spread ASAP, and I thought it would be quicker to work with the Gilberti Company than with guild members I had never met before. I will instruct you in a new manner of dyeing cloth, and I ask that you use it to prepare wearable clothes by next winter. I intend to spread this as a trend in the near future. Thule widened her eyes a little as if to say she really is being unreasonable again. At the same time, Leon, who was standing behind Karina as her assistant, leaned closer and asked for permission to speak. There was a distinct sparkle in his eyes. You may speak, Leon. I thank you. Am I right to assume this new technology is not related to hairpins, but is instead a new way of making cloth? That is correct, I replied. Although it would be more accurate to say this new method is not for making cloth, but for dyeing it. Upon hearing my explanation, Leon broke into a smile. I blinked, unsure what had made him so pleased, but Otto explained for me. Leon's family apparently owned a store that sold cloth to the Gilberti Company, and they had connections to every dyeing workshop in the city. His family would make quite a killing if cloth incorporating this new dyeing method garnered a lot of attention. Shall we go to the workshop then, I proposed? I will show you the process firsthand to supplement the explanation. Fran summoned Gil. Gil guided us to the workshop, and upon our arrival, everyone stopped working to greet us. I had everyone return to their duties except Gil and Fritz, who were going to be performing the demonstration. Otto and Karina looked around the workshop curiously, but Leon seemed more wistful. His eyes were on the tools used to switch paper, so I could guess he was remembering the past. Nostalgic, isn't it? Is it, Leon? It is. I used to come here almost every day. You may help today if you so wish. The dyeing workshops will need more demonstrations like this one we are about to show. I noted with a refined chuckle, at the same time signaling to Gil with my eyes. He nodded in response and then began to address those gathered. What we are about to demonstrate is a method used to draw art directly on cloth. We are not well informed on local cloth production methods, so it is possible you are already familiar with it. Gil said preemptively before looking at me for confirmation. I nodded and then gazed across those for the Gilberta Company. There are many ways of weaving and embroidering cloth to make it more beautiful, but I have only ever seen cloth dyed a single color. Are there any technologies for drawing directly on cloth, or perhaps certain ways in which cloth is folded and cinched with thread to create designs? There was long ago, Karina said, placing a hand on her cheek. As it turned out, among the clothes left behind by the founder of the Gilberta Company had been some tie-dyed cloth. Nice. This happened decades ago, but there was once an Archduke candidate from Ehrenbach who wed into the duchy. She brought new cultural trends and technologies to Ehrenfest one after another, and those new trends and style required cloth of a solid color, which resulted in the technology for even dyeing being improved and embroidery growing in popularity. At the same time, it is said that the technology for dyeing subsequently degraded into what it is today. Nobles were generally the only ones who purchased cloth in bulk, and if all of noble society considered single-color cloth to be of the highest quality, it was only natural that all the dyeing workshops would make it their top priority. Tie-dyeing and the irregular colors it produced had consequently been abandoned in the blink of an eye, and judging by modern trends, I could see how that had happened. An interesting history. In which case, will there be craftspeople ready to return to old forms once I attempt to spread the dyeing technique again, I asked. No, I believe they're all gone. The literacy rate among craftspeople was almost 0%, which meant most didn't leave behind records and technologies were easily lost. This change of trends had happened long enough ago that pretty much all those who were alive back then had since passed away. The dyeing is not especially difficult, so I imagine it will revive as soon as I start making orders. Individual workshops can perform any additional research at their leisure, although I would appreciate it if written records of any findings are made so as to not be lost again in the capricious tide of popularity. Perhaps I could ask the Dyeing Guild to handle that? I will speak to the guild, as they may already have some records stashed away, Karina said. Leon nodded in agreement and jotted down a reminder on his diptych. In addition to tie-dyeing, I wish to introduce a method known as resist dyeing. It may have existed in the past, but if it has also been lost, please revive it. I pointed to 2 sheets of cloth onto which Wilma had sketched flowers with soot pencil. As everyone looked at them with great interest, Gil and Fritz began tracing them with brushes tipped with melted wax as we had discussed. One need only put wax in the places one wishes to remain undyed, and the places that one wishes to leave white. Do we not need dye for the wax part? Leon asked. I nodded in response. The stiff wax that Fritz had applied had started to crack as it dried, while the wax that Gil had applied hadn't. This is the difference the type of wax makes, I explained. If you're going to do resist dyeing, then please cooperate with a wax workshop to make wax with the right balance of ingredients. Leon grimaced, having experienced firsthand the endless trial and error of the mine workshop. Absorbing new technologies was no easy matter, especially considering I had simply taught the process. It was the professionals who needed to hone it to perfection. Fritz, crack the wax a bit more, if you would. Fritz struck the cloths to form more cracks. Then he and Gil started smearing the colored ink that Heidi had invented over the wax. They used the rollers for mimeograph printing and were thus able to cover the handkerchief-sized cloths with the red in no time at all. The areas where the wax had been added, however, remained undyed. Once the cloth has been dyed, the next step is to melt the wax. Wax melts when heated, no. One needs only submerge the cloth in boiling water once the dyeing is complete. Gil gripped the 2 pieces of cloth with the chopsticks, dumped them into a pot, dexterously stirred them around, and then pulled them out again. All the Grey Priests in the Rosemine workshop could already use chopsticks since they were necessary in the paper-making process when handling bark and wood. Fritz washed the heated cloth with cool water, squeezed it dry, and then spread it flat on the table. On one piece was a sharp white flower, while on the other was a flower with unusual cracks running through it. I believe that both of these styles are usable. It all depends on the customer's preference. One can use tie-dyeing and resist dyeing in tandem, and since colors grow darker when dyed several times over, one could, as an example, wax the petals of an illustrated flower to distinguish the color of flowers, leaves, and a background. Of course, you can embroider on top of all this as well. I see, Otto said with a nod. Behind him, Theo was desperately noting all this down. Assistants sure had it rough. You can use pliable wax to draw fairly precise detailed art, or you can use stiff cracked wax to create more unique patterns. I believe both are worth experimenting with. How would you like your own new cloth to be dyed, Lady Rosemary Karina asked, causing me to fall into thought. I certainly liked tie-dye cloth, but resist dyeing was hard to ignore. I wish to support as many new technologies as possible, so I will order one piece of tie-dye cloth and one piece of resist-dyed cloth from each style of cloth that a given dyeing workshop in Ehrenfest owns. I wish for the dyes to be red, the divine color of winter, and I will select which cloth to use from those that are presented to me. Excuse me. That will certainly liven up the dyeing workshop, Otto said, his voice tinged with awe. It is my pleasure, I said with a smile. I know more ways of dyeing than the two he have shown you today, so I'm open to discussing business once more. Another gathering of the Gutenbergs. After raising more questions about the new dyeing methods, Otto crossed his arms and went quiet. He had the eyes of a merchant trying to figure out how much they were going to be worth. I stared up at him, awaiting his response, until Karina slid in between us. Lady Rosamond, regarding the sale of new dyeing methods, I would advise you to do business directly with the dyeing guild soon after spreading these new ones you have demonstrated, she said, maintaining a peaceful smile but looking at me with firm eyes. Even if we were to buy the rights, the Gilberta Company and the workshops we collaborate with will not be able to monopolize them. Your influence is much simply too large, Lady Rosamond. Any trends I started would spread throughout almost all the nobility's women in an instant. Karina was saying that the Gilberta Company and its small number of cooperative workshops would struggle to manage the vast wave of orders that would no doubt flood in. It would take both time and money for the Gilberta Company to buy the rights, research the dyeing methods, and train their workers to be skilled enough to meet the standards of nobles. My spreading these trends now would put them in a position where they couldn't keep up with all the orders they would receive, which in turn would require them to publicize the methods to desperately train a bunch of workers all at once. If we end up in a situation where we have to rely on other stores and workshops to keep up with the trend, the Gilberta Company will earn the harsh reproach of nobles and the merchants alike. Karina concluded. In other words, she had decided it wasn't profitable for their store to buy the new dyeing methods. Benno always tried to secure my new technologies before anyone else so that he could extract as much money from them as possible, while Karina focused entirely on whether they would benefit her area of expertise, sewing. They shared the same blood and occupation, but they were entirely unlike when it came to business. That said, their sharp eyes when it came to deducing whether something was profitable for them looked extremely similar. Karina may look calm and peaceful, but she certainly is Benno's little sister. I didn't have a strong grasp of the connections between merchants in the city and what went on with the lot buying and selling of rights, so if the Gilberta Company thought it would only bring them anguish, it was probably best that I give up on this transaction. So I should sell resist dyeing to the dyeing guild directly, I asked, confirming that I had understood. Karina shook her head. That we will gratefully accept as a gift. We will sell the dyeing method and all its details at a low price to the dyeing guild. From there we shall convey your orders to the dyeing guild and request that all the available workshops start producing the many cloths you have requested. Upon hearing this suggestion, Leon, whose family ran a store that sold cloth to the Gilberta Company, looked more excited than I had ever seen him before. I imagine each of these dyeing workshops will expand their best efforts to fulfill this order so that they might gain exclusive business with you, Lady Rosamond, Karina said. Yeah, the Gutenbergs are growing in fame as they accomplish big things, even outside the city. There's a lot of craftsmen who want to become Gutenbergs themselves, Otto muttered before looking at me. Lady Rosamond, might I ask for you to decide on at least 2 workshops to give your exclusive business to, as you did with the 2 smithies, and might I suggest that you grant them the title of Gutenberg also. It might be worth ranking the delivered cloth and working with the dyeing guild to charge fees to dyeing workshops that want the methods. I was trying to spread resist dying throughout the lower city before Justice sniffed at my plans, but I feel like this is blowing up into something a lot bigger than I wanted. I hadn't expected this result. I turned my attention to Thule as I pondered what to do, only to see that she was already looking at me with a face that said, "Don't ask me, I don't know what the heck to do here." "Still, Lady Rosamund, how did you learn of such old methods?" Leon asked curiously. I smiled. "Through books, of course. I see, leaving records truly is important." "I agree." "Okay," he bought it. "I did read about them in books, but I know how to actually put them into practice because we attempted them during my home studies class in middle school. Back on Earth, I had experienced tie-dyeing and resist dyeing firsthand. An otaku friend of mine had surprised everyone by using the latter method to masterfully dye an illustration of her favorite anime character on a handkerchief. What had surprised me the most was that she had misspelled the name of the character despite so enthusiastically claiming to be their biggest fan. Oh my god. In the end, despite my misgivings, we settled on the Gilberta Company running a competition that could focus on reviving old technologies and securing the Gutenberg's title. It seemed the competition had to be held at the end of summer, since otherwise there wouldn't be time to debut the cloth made by my new exclusive dyers at winter socializing. Judging by how lively Leon was about my decision on new exclusive workshops, I could guess that his family will be profiting immensely from the Gilberta Company's orders. This ended up much bigger than I expected, but oh well. And so my discussion with the Gilberta Company concluded. Once I was back in my room, I wrote out the details for the cloth dyeing competition while looking over the notes Fran had made on the meeting. "Once the Starbine ceremony is over, I don't have any plans until the Harvest Festival, correct?" I asked. "None in the temple," Fran replied. "Do you have any in the castle?" It depends on the results of the Archduke Conference. The merchants of Ehrenfest might all find themselves in quite a bind afterward. As it stood, I didn't have any particular plans between the end of summer and autumn. I smoothed out the wax of my diptych to erase the text on it, and that was when Gil came rushing in with a letter. "Lady Rosamund, the Planting Company has sent a letter," he announced. "It was good timing. I had been thinking about meeting the Gutenbergs once before leaving for Haldensdale, both to order the safety pins and to check up on the progress of my previous orders." "Thank you, Gil. You may rest for a moment as I write out my response." "I imagine you were quite busy preparing for and cleaning up after the demonstration," I said, praising him as I opened the letter. On the surface, it was a simple request for a meeting, laden in heavy noble euphemisms, but if one carefully read between the lines, it could possibly be read in an alternate way. "What the hell did you do this time? Explain yourself, idiot." Is it just me, or does this letter exude a sense of frustration too strong to be contained by noble euphemisms? I don't think this is just my imagination. Having sensed something seething anger from the letter, I wrote my response, in which I simply stated that I wanted to meet with the Gutenbergs and discuss their progress over the past 2 years, before our departure for Haldensdale. Having other people present would no doubt serve to block some of Benno's anger for me. That might make him even more frustrated since it's blatant trickery on my part, but I'm not about to ignore the tools I have at my disposal. The date for the meeting was scheduled instantly, perhaps because I had mentioned at the end of my letter that I didn't have much time, since I would be returning to the castle after the spring baptisms. The Gutenbergs would be gathered on the day before the baptisms in the orphanage director's chambers, and the attendees were going to be the Planting Company trio, Johann and Zach, the Smiths, Ingo the carpenter, Heidi and Joseph the inkmakers, and Gil of my own workshop. All in all, there were quite a few people attending. Thinking about it, this is going to be the first time we've held a gathering of the Gutenbergs here, I mused aloud. Johann, Zach, and Ingo had come to the temple before to make the printing press, but this would presumably be a new experience for Heidi and Joseph. Fran, Daniel, Angelica, this will be a meeting of craftsmen from the lower city. I expect some of them to have somewhat substandard manners, but please overlook it. Understood. There were enough people coming this time that we would be holding the meeting in the hall on the first floor. My attendants did their best carrying drawn chairs from the second floor and preparing a table to accommodate the expected numbers. As I gave orders from the second floor, I glanced in my hidden room at the door that would no longer open. A sense of sadness and loss struck me all at once, but I slapped myself on the cheeks and inhaled deeply, forcing the feelings away. I had promised Lutz that I would continue advancing toward my goal. I couldn't allow any pain to show in my face while he was here. "Lady Rosamund, the Gutenbergs have arrived," Fran said. I glanced down to see that Gil was guiding my visitors in one after another. The Planting Company trio were used to the orphanage director's chambers, and they looked completely calm. I greeted them with a soft smile, and they returned my greeting with polite smiles of their own. To my relief, neither Benno nor Daniel appeared at all bothered by this exchange. A smile at least was permitted between a noble and the merchant they did exclusive business with. The three of them were followed in by Johann and Zach, who had seemed a bit nervous, perhaps because it had been so long since they were last here. Ingo entered next while looking behind him, as though he were being pushed inside, and then came Heidi, who actually was pushing him inside. She was in turn followed by Joseph, who was trying to stop her. "I see you're doing well, Lady Rose," mine Heidi exclaimed with a wide grin and a two-handed wave after popping her head over Ingo's shoulder to see me. "That's great. I was so worried after you didn't wake up for 2 whole years." I smiled a little with nostalgia, but that attitude wouldn't do here. My guard knight's Daniel had stiffened up, and Fran averted his eyes from Heidi while rubbing his temples much like Ferdinand would. It seemed as though he was willing himself not to get annoyed. Joseph, paling at Daniel and Fran's reaction, pushed his wife's head down and then pulled her toward him. "You idiot," he chided her in a hushed voice. "You're talking to the High Bishop who gives real blessings. You can't talk to her like you used to anymore." "Sure, but she's also the one funding my ink research for her books, right? You're not wrong there, but still, you're being too rude. You're a mother now, so calm down a little, alright? Wait, really? Really? When did that happen? I guess the 2 years that she was asleep?" I felt my mind go blank at those words. Heidi hadn't looked any different to me since she had already come of age when we met, so it hadn't occurred to me that she might have had kids since the last time I saw her. I guess it's not unusual for Heidi to have kids now since she was already married. Even Volk had kids while I was asleep. I really shouldn't find this strange, but you know what? I still do. "He's right," Benno said. "You can't just act like that here. And while scholars are going to be attending our meetings from now on, Joseph, either fix her attitude or don't let her come next time," he warned, speaking so frankly either because he was caught up in the atmosphere or because he thought the language used by nobles wouldn't be understood by the common craftspeople. Joseph clapped his hands together and said, "That second one's a good idea." It seemed that he had decided not to bring Heidi to meetings with the scholars present. As Benno said, "I expect that scholars would be attending all meetings henceforth," I noted. "Joseph, it seems that you alone will represent the ink workshop from now on." "Compared to the struggles that come with bringing Heidi along, it would be much easier for me to come alone," Joseph said with a tired sigh, earning him a refined giggle from me and a firm nod from agreement from both Daniel and Fran. If ink wasn't involved, Heidi would perhaps be more calm, but she's excited to be seeing her investor again after so many years. "That's right," Heidi exclaimed. "I've been dying to give you a report, milady. I've done tons of research, and now we can make ink of consistent quality and colors. To be more specific, She had started giving me her report before I even asked for it. I gave her a half smile while briskly recording her results on a sheet of paper. It seemed they had invented new fixing agents, or rather a varnish-like substance that could be applied to top ink to preserve it without changing its color. Nice. After praising their efforts and promising to continue funding their research, I told the Gutenbergs about ingredients having certain elements, and that Ferdinand had commended them for getting any results at all without knowing this. So, in short, the element within an ingredient will change what the color is when mixed. What the color will change what the color is when mixed, I said. Heidi, who had been listening with trembling fists, shot me an excited look. "I can't believe such a convenient magic tool exists. I want one too, milady. Please let me buy one of my investment funds." "He's not going to let you." "I know how you feel. I similarly wanted one to help further your ink research, but they are not as easy to acquire. Furthermore, it being a magic tool means I do not know if commoners will even be able to use it." "Aw, that's not fair. How come nobles get all the luck?" Heidi moaned, flailing about in a show of exaggerated agony that felt all too familiar to me. "I know. It sucks." It was like I was seeing myself back when I had just woken in this body and learned that only nobles get to be librarians. I wanted to base predictions of what kind of paper a given fey plant will produce on existing research, I explained, but nothing can be done without the measuring magic tool. "Milady, don't give up. Heidi cried. "We can still win this. If we had the time and resources, perhaps, but at the moment, I do not have either." Heidi slumped her shoulders, tears welling up in her eyes. "If you can't get it, I guess there's nothing we can do." Moving on, I turned my attention to Johann and Zach. "What results have the smithies seen?" Johann and Zach exchanged glances, deciding who would speak first to do style and expressions, and eye movements. They had both come of age while I was asleep, so the boyish looks I remembered had vanished completely. Now they both looked to be adults capable of doing their jobs. "I'll start," Zach eventually said. 2 years ago, I was given the task of designing carriages that don't bounce and beds made of springs. Here are the blueprints. How are they?" I looked at Zach's blueprint myself. And I think the design for this carriage will bounce the least, Johann added, but when it comes to mass production, this one is the better pick. The parts for it aren't as hard to make. I took in their thoughts while looking at the 3 different blueprints. It seemed to me that he had made a suspended carriage. And this is the bed you requested, Zack continued. The blueprint is exactly as you requested it. I'm currently in the process of making improvements to the design. But it's been quite the challenge, so I'll expect it'll be quite some time before it's finished. It'll be more expensive, too. Make the best design you can, I said. The price is irrelevant, so I'll make more money through it, as I will make more money through it. That said, I'm surprised you were able to produce a workable design in the first place. Despite having my own vague recollections of pocket and bottle coils to work from, Zack had actually managed to design a bed, opting to use pocket coils since they were easier for him to visualize. Assuming he actually finished the whole bed, my time asleep was going to be blissful to say the least. In any case, begin making an adult-sized bed, I continued. As for the carriages, I'll purchase the designs for the one that can be mass-produced. The designs you produce henceforth can be entrusted to the smithing guild, just as the pump designs were correct. We have to work in equal measures with the carpentry guild of making carriages, so please speak with them too. As for payment, we can follow the same approach we took with the pumps, Zack said. It was a system wherein Zack and I would receive an inventor's fee every time a carriage was made using the blueprints. Very well, I will trust the bridging of the smithing and carpentry guilds to Benno. My initial idea was to have Ingo serve this purpose, but perhaps an unrelated third party is best. Understood. I paid Zack using the guild card I had as the forewoman in the Rosemine workshop and then turned to Johann. How has your progress been? I believe I requested that you produce metal letter types and spread the hand pumps. I am steadily increasing the number of metal letter types in circulation, and every single one is solid on the spot. Haldensdale does not yet have a smith that can make them perfectly, so they have been purchased in an especially large quantity. Those in Haldensdale were planning to print while stuck inside over the winter, and they couldn't do their work without metal letter types. They wanted plenty of spares too, since I knew from Johann that he had rejected all the letter types due to being imprecisely made. I hope Haldensdale learns to make them soon, Johann said. Going over there so often has been a real struggle. If they are not ready when you visit this spring, I will consult Keep Haldensdale about sending some of their craftsmen to Ehrenfest. This will be the last time you go to Haldensdale. Johann looked relieved to hear this, so I clarified that it was only because I needed him to travel to other places instead. He grimaced hard and slumped his shoulders, although I couldn't quite figure out why. As I watched him with quizzical eyes, the other Gutenbergs all gave him sympathetic looks. Is there a problem with that? I asked. Everyone looked at each other for a second, after which Letts elected to speak for them. This is something of a personal problem for Johann, but his perfectionism when it comes to letter types and the difficulty he has interacting with others often earns him much reproach. He always struggles the most when teaching those of a new province. It certainly must have been rough in Haldensdale considering their insular community and aversion to outsiders. However, the Geeb has informed me that they praise Johann highly. The craftspeople were enthusiastically working together this winter to secure a passing mark. Johann blinked at me in surprise, no doubt having expected his reputation to be much worse, seeing that Zack elbowed him lightly and grinned. Told you, didn't I? They were just shouty because they knew you were better than them. Well, either way, you're the one who can do this right now. You're just gotta suck it up until your guys all trained and ready. Zack, why are you referring to there? I asked. Johann's disciple, Danilo. He's burning with the passion to become a Gutenberg no matter what, so I imagine he will force his way into one of these meetings soon enough, Zack replied, laughing hard enough that his shoulders started to shake. Johann bit his mouth into a sharp frown before continuing his report. The hand pumps are spreading at a steady rate. We'll be selling them in the north and to merchants, and now we're finally able to take orders from the east. Orders from the rich and those they had work relationships with inevitably took priority, but now they were finally able to start delivering hand pumps to other parts of the city. That is good progress indeed, I said. Please do continue at your current pace. Oh, and I almost forgot, Johann, I would like you to make these as well. Johann accepted the blueprints for safety pins, skimmed them, and then frowned. Are normal pins not good enough, he asked. I don't think these are too different. It's dangerous to have the point of the needle sticking out, do you not think? I, for one, am not particularly fond of pain. That is why it is important to have the sharp tip of the pin hidden away, I said, tapping on the part of the blueprint that described the cap in question. Johann gave a small smile. You always seem to focus on things nobody else would care about in the slightest, he said. Then he put his business face back on. Lady Rosamund, may I give this order to my disciple? Certainly, so long as he can make it according to the blueprint. He'll need to be able to fulfill my orders to stand a chance at one day becoming a Gutenberg. This is going to be good practice for him, Johann said with a nod, as he carefully put away the blueprint. I shifted my gaze to Ingo. Next was my primary order of the day. And you, Ingo, did you finish the bookshelves? I asked, looking up at him with excited eyes. I had tasked him with making mobile bookshelves, then high-density shelving. Ingo frowned a little. I made a shelf according to your exact specifications, he said, but were there any problems? It moved just fine when the shelves were empty, but you're going to have a hard time once you start putting books on them. In fact, when we packed the thing with stuff, it wouldn't budge at all. It's not good enough to be delivered to you, Ingo explained, scratching his cheek awkwardly as my eyes widened. I thought about improving on your designs, but I didn't know what to do with the metal rails on the wheels. Or the wheels, they're outside of my specialty. I figured it would be best to start by redoing the blueprints themselves. It seemed that Ingo's workshop could have figured things out through trial and error if the railing had been made of wood. But as carpenters by trade, there wasn't much they could do with metal. Johann? Please leave the blueprints to Zack, Johann said at once, dumping it on his fellow smith as if begging not to be given any more work than he was already having to balance. I turned my eyes to Zack, who reluctantly accepted, albeit after noting that minor modifications weren't his specialty. Thank goodness, my dreams of getting high-density mobile shelving is still alive. Just as my stress levels began to dip back down, however, Benno spoke up. He wore a deep smile, but his dark red eyes were brimming with an indescribable anger that made my anxiety shoot right back up. By the way, Lady Rosamund, Karina told me something very interesting the other day. It seems that you are branching into the dyeing industry as well now. That you are reviving ancient technologies, as she put it. That is very interesting indeed. Uh-oh. His expression made it clear that he was actually saying, "Are you stupid or something? Is now really the time to get so involved with dyeing?" I placed a hand on my cheek, unsure whether he was more angry or exasperated. There was no end to the benefits brought about by new trends, and as this was merely reviving old technologies, I would hardly even give myself credit for it. All the honor should go to the craftspeople who learned the revived technologies and used them anew. I believe now is a good opportunity to leisurely train dyers in this new practices. It seems that nobles have an entirely different understanding of the word leisurely than us commoners, Benno said, this time with a clearly exasperated expression. The other Gutenbergs were nodding to themselves like, so this is what nobles consider leisurely. That explains everything. In a shocking twist, people had come to believe I was some kind of ruthless educator who trained people by having them complete more and more difficult work. It was horrible. That was Ferdinand, not me. Yeah, he would do that. The tasks I gave were simple things I hoped one day would be completed. I wasn't as though they absolutely needed to be done or else. But when I attempted to convey this, Zack frowned and shook his head. Our perspectives are different, he said. To us, a craftsman who can't finish the jobs he's given is incompetent. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Sorry for all the trouble. That said, I'm not going to change. I believe spreading the new dyeing method will increase ink sales, and so it is worth doing. I have not spoken of the dyeing method relevant to the planting company, and Karina said that it would be harder to do business directly with the dyeing guild. Or best to do business with the dyeing guild. The dyeing method relevant to the planting company, you say? Oh crap, I've said too much. I was planning to keep quiet about stencil dyeing for a little while longer. There is another dyeing method, one that is more related to the planting company, I explained. I expect to sell this method to the dyeing guild once I have decided on my exclusive workshops, and then have them predominantly focus their efforts on using it. I could feel Benno's mood darkening as I spoke, his eyes narrowed, demanding that I explain exactly what this has to do with the planting company. I merely said it was related to the planting company because it uses special ink and paper. It will simply result in you selling more stationery. Any more details will come at a price. Understood, Benno said, leaving it at that. After everyone had given their reports, we moved on to discussing our plans in Haldensdale. I explained that those coming were going to be traveling with me on my high beast, and that we would depart as soon as spring prayer ended. The magic contracts being changed had far-reaching impacts, and to handle the resulting red tape, Benno and Damien from the planting company were going to accompany me, as were Johann and Zack. Since they had already finished teaching those in Haldensdale to make black ink, Heidi and Joseph didn't need to come along. And as for the colored ink, the planting company could bring and sell it themselves. Ingo likewise had finished teaching them to make the printing press itself, and the carpenter carpenters over there had since achieved a passing grade. The Rosemont workshop didn't need to send anyone either, since those in Holdensdale already knew how to print, and their papermaking was postponed for now. Benno, how long will your affairs take? I asked. If you are with us, Lady Rosemont, I imagine 3 days will be enough, he replied. Under normal circumstances, even getting a brief meeting with the noble took forever, but he expected things to progress much more quickly with me around. It sounded like we were able to go there and get back in the blink of an eye. Then I, too, will put my all into the negotiations with the scholars, such that the printing may be spread as much as possible. I believe it will be better if you contained yourself a little more, Lutz said, his cheek twitching ever so slightly, but I had already decided to devote my all to making my dream a reality, so there was no holding back now. It has been decided that a legal deposit system will henceforth be introduced, I announced. The castle has permitted it, so be sure to inform the workshops throughout the printing guild. I then went on to explain what this legal deposit system was, and how copies of all printed materials would need to be given to me in Ehrenfest Castle. I understand the system, and do not mind its implementation, since nothing will change in practice, but why 2 copies, Benno asked. Will you not always remain in the castle, Lady Rosamond? He was indirectly saying I didn't need a copy for myself when I wasn't going to be wed into another duchy. I stuck my pointer finger up and wagged it at him. My ambitions wouldn't be satisfied by the castle's bookroom. No, I had my sights set on a much, much bigger future. I planned to one day build a massive library, one that contains a copy of every book in not just Ehrenfest, but Jürgen Schmidt as a whole. To that end, I must begin collecting books immediately, I said, puffing out my chest with pride as I announced my goal. Upon hearing this declaration, the Gutenbergs all cratered their heads as they realized they were stuck with me forever. I think he kind of should have figured that out. I'll keep going one more chapter. Disappearing ink and returning to the castle. The spring baptism ceremony had begun. As I made my way to the shrine, I glanced at the children who weren't any smaller than me out of the corner of my eye. Hearing the crowd whisper as I walked was nothing new, but since this was a baptism ceremony, they were all children, and children were a lot more direct than the adults at the coming-of-age ceremony. Hey, don't say, holy crap, she's so tiny, I can hear you. And don't point at me like I'm some freak of nature. If my guard knights were here, they'd pick you up and throw you out. They probably would. Angelica would, anyway. I walked on, feeling a bit like an animal at a zoo, and climbed atop the podium. Ferdinand then began a speech to the gods, after which I ended the ceremonies by blessing the children. I didn't see any of my family at the door, maybe because the coming-of-age ceremony had only been a week ago. Oh well, Thule has work too. And now that is done, Ferdinand said to me. Are you planning to lock yourself up in your workshop again, I asked. We're going to be hiding in the temple until Count Leisgang leaves the city, correct? I heard so from Eckert. Great-grandfather and Count Leisgang had been planning to marry Ferdinand and me to make him the next Archduke and minimize the amount of Ehrenbach blood in the Archducal family. My part actually was about to say the best situation when it comes to her marriage prospects would have been Ferdinand, to be honest. Because 1, he's competent. 2, he probably would be able to match her mana capacity. Or she would be able to match his, either way. 3, he doesn't need any training as an Archduke. She doesn't need to be the Archduchess, so the whole pregnancy thing wouldn't have to be an issue. 4, he knows her best out of everybody, so he would probably be able to corral her the best when it comes to keeping her at bay from her crazy shenanigans. And 6, she would be able to stay in Ehrenfest, so yeah, that would have been the best idea. They had apparently been convinced that Ferdinand was aiming for the Archducal seat, considering that he had put me under his protection, played a considerable role in my adoption, returned to noble society after Veronica's expulsion, and then officially became my guardian. Ferdinand, having been probed by Count Leisgang over his plans for marriage, had subsequently shattered great-grandfather's plotting by having Wilfred and me get engaged. It seemed odd to me that we were hiding away and refusing to attend meetings despite this, but reigning in nobles plotting to put their ideal Archduke on the seat was apparently the job of the current Archduke and the planned future Archduke, that is, Sylvester and Wilfried. In other words, it wasn't something for us to concern ourselves with. Eckert had explained it to me like so while eyeing the door to Ferdinand's locked workshop. Were Lord Ferdinand ambitious, he would have remained in the castle instead of returning to the temple. There, he would have acquired all the backing he needed simply by accepting the proposals he was given and remaining silent. but he instead demonstrated his loyalty to Lord Sylvester by minimizing contact, relaying information to the Archduke, and subsequently leaving any cleanup to him. There is no better way to display one's complete lack of involvement in politics than locking oneself away in the temple. It seemed that I could also display my position that I would follow up Ehrenfest's orders by simply avoiding contact and remaining in the temple. As Eckert explained, I have no intention of opposing Sylvester, Ferdinand said. The same goes for you, no? And you are always more lively in the temple. Remaining here is far from a discomfort for you, is it not? True, I have no interest in the next Archduke. And remaining in the temple is not discomforting in the least. I must say, though, the same goes for you, Ferdinand. You are always more lively when you can do your research. The Blue Priest could now properly assist him with his work, and since most of the work inherited from the former High Bishop had since been completed, Ferdinand could much more easily acquire free time in the temple. He curved his lips up into a slight smile to signal his agreement. The fact that he didn't audibly agree was probably because nobles weren't really allowed to say they preferred the temple to the castle. I think it's fine for you to spend your time here on your research at least. You can lock yourself away in the workshop if you wish, I said. Ferdinand raised an eyebrow. I would appreciate not being interrupted for such trifling matters as food, but yeah, you need food to live. Yeah. Can't go without food for too long. Putting that aside, there is something I must discuss about that ink of yours. I would be visiting your workshop after lunch. Prepare for my arrival, he said, his expression hardening ever so slightly. His research on my special ink must not have produced good results. Or maybe they produced results that he couldn't explain. Maybe. I asked Fran about my plans for the day and then agreed to the visit. Ferdinand arrived after lunch, bringing with him a box filled with various jars of ink. I opened my workshop's door to allow him and Eckert inside. Justice was absent since he was visiting the noble's quarter to get updates on the situation there. My guard knights Angelica and Daniel came in as well. After instructing the guard knights to wait by the door, Ferdinand got me to hold a sound-blocking magic tool. I made the same ink and performed various experiments he began as he lined up the various jars one after another. Each one had a unique label tied to it with a string, but what was written on them caused me to blink in surprise. Rosemine, Ferdinand, -1, -2. I recognized the names, and what are the minuses, I asked. The ink I made of one or two fewer elements. It is clear that the mana dust added in the final stage is responsible for the unusual ink. Nothing else caused similar changes, Ferdinand explained. He had evidently managed to make ink with one and two elements removed from his mana. How does one remove elements? That sounds pretty tricky. My results show that the ink will not swell or disappear unless one has all the elements, Ferdinand continued. Rosemine, try writing with my ink as well. I took the pen presented to me and wrote on the cloth. The ink, unlike my own, bled a little. Then after a moment it started to swell up. As expected, Ferdinand observed, looking at the line I had drawn with great interest. If one has the elements, monocolor, and quality, the ink does not bleed much at all. There was no mistaking that those with all the elements will see such swelling no matter whose ink they use. Ferdinand seemed satisfied as this theory became confirmed with evidence. I tilted my head at my line on the cloth. Using his ink hadn't resulted in a clean marking. It seems to bleed more than when you used my ink, Ferdinand. That is likely due to the difference in mana. You have less mana than I do. It is only natural that you would have an easier time writing on cloth, dyed with your mana, using ink made with your mana. Okay, so she does have less mana than him. Okay, so once she hopefully comes of age, she might actually have around the same amount of mana as he does. Which is what, like I said, that kind of adds into the point that Ferdinand and Rosemine would probably be the best bet. To think that ink made with someone else's mana made this much of a difference. I now understood why it was so much more efficient to make magic tools for personal use of one's own mana. Hence Ferdinand making everything he needs himself. This ink is the product of sheer circumstance, Ferdinand said, due to you wanting to avoid embroidering and thus creating mana-rich ink to use on cloth dyed with your mana. It seems so. We shall use this ink solely for creating the outfits and making the production method a secret. It is too dangerous to unveil. There are countless ways in which ink that disappears but can nonetheless activate magic circles can end up being misused, Ferdinand noted, his light golden eyes watching me quietly. I nodded slowly in agreement. One could easily use it to modify magic contracts in secret, or stealthily place attack-oriented magic circles anywhere. It is quite dangerous indeed. I find it concerning that you would think up such malevolent tricks on the spot. Perhaps you are the scary one. But you're choosing to hide the production method precisely because you consider the same things, aren't you? I asked. Ferdinand grimaced and nodded. Only someone with all elements can create disappearing ink. Likewise, only someone with all elements can use it. This restricts its usage to select members of royalty. sovereign archnobles and archducal families throughout the duchies. If someone of such high status elected to misuse this ink, it can result in an entire duchy, or even the country itself, being turned on its head. He was right. There was no need to introduce something so dangerous to the world. I wasn't a fan of danger or violence, and there was no harm in keeping something that could be misused a secret. I agree entirely. All I care about is escaping the need to embroider my clothes. Good grief. I appreciate that you understand the dangers involved and will cooperate with keeping it a secret. But an engaged woman still needs to know how to embroider. Escapism is not healthy, Ferdinand said, shaking his head and rubbing his temples as if to say I was making his head hurt. I will arrange for the library's magic tools to be embroidered as before, he continued. It is possible that their clothing might be examined by their next owner, as we have examined those provided previously, so we will draw the magic circles with your ink, and then embroider the circles atop those using thread dyed with your mana. Under normal circumstances, having another do the embroidery would weaken its effects, but that will not be relevant with you having first drawn them with ink. That said, I expect you to embroider at least one of the circles yourself, both as bridal training and to learn about magic circles. Is that understood? My shoulders dropped with utter despair as he fixed me with a stern glare. In the end, I couldn't escape embroidering. Was there even a point in brewing the ink, then? I asked with a hint of melancholy. You'll need to only embroider a single circle now. Is that not significant enough? Yeah, you don't have to do all of them. Ferdinand placed the ink back inside the wooden box, then he turned around and gestured for me to return to the sound-blocking magic tool. It seemed that our secret conversation was over. Eckert, Daniel, Angelica, we have elected to keep the production method for this ink a secret. You are to speak of it to nobody. Is that clear? Ferdinand asked, addressing the 3 guard knights who had seen the ink being made up close. None of them had all the elements, so there was no risk of them making the ink themselves, but we certainly didn't want them spreading the method. Ferdinand received a sharp yes, sir, from all the 3 guards, after which Angelica proudly added, I don't even remember what I saw, so you don't need to worry about a thing. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Ferdinand was rendered speechless for a solid moment, having never expected that a noble could watch the brewing of a magic tool up close and remember absolutely nothing of the process. This silence was his response when his mind shut down at something he found utterly impossible to comprehend, but after years of dealing with me, he was able to recover much faster. In the end, Ferdinand elected not to think too hard about it. He glanced at Angelica, indicated his understanding in as few words as possible, and then changed the topic. Incidentally, Rosemine, Fran came to deliver his report. In it, he mentioned that you have begun something strange with the lower city merchants again. You have your sights set on dying now, I cocked my head, unsure what he was trying to say. I had entrusted the report to Fran, and I was pretty sure he hadn't left anything out. Ferdinand gave an exasperated expression at my confusion. If you are starting something which could possibly become a new trend, speak first with Lady Florencia or Elvira. This will only cause confusion. Understood. I wasn't sure whether it would draw enough attention to become a new trend, considering that we were just reviving an old method, but I decided to give the report regardless. For the 2 days we needed to wait for justice to return, I spent my afternoons swimming in a veritable sea of books. My brain became a soup of letters, and the floaty sensation in my head was amazing. I made the most of the bliss until Ferdinand inevitably summoned me. It seems that Count Lyesgang has finally left the castle, he said. Count Lyesgang had been waiting our return to the castle for as long as he possibly could, desperate to arrange a meeting with us, only to eventually cave and leave. All nobles other than the Lyesgangs have given up on making you the next Ob, Justice explained. Your repeated proclamation to the children in the Royal Academy that you do not intend to take up the position proved effective, to say the least. As did your former guard knight, Bridget, speaking of your lack of ambition for power. It seemed they were beginning to settle for keeping me in Ehrenfest as the Archduke's first wife, such that I wouldn't end up being wed to another duchy. Their relenting was thanks in large part to Sylvester's hard work and efforts in convincing the others. Now would be a good time to return to the castle, Justice concluded. There are going to be meetings before the Archduke Conference, and the Ob wishes to discuss the infrastructure of the lower city. Very well, Ferdinand said. Rosemine, we shall return tomorrow. Okay, oh, wait. Is something the matter? Ferdinand asked, furrowing his brow as he put up his guard. What shall we do with my personal chefs? I have given Hugo time off to prepare for his marriage, and while we can bring Ellen with us, I am worried about sending an unmarried woman to the castle kitchen, especially since she knows all of my recipes. I would not like her to be taken away. Ferdinand thought for a moment and then nodded. She will certainly be targeted if she is left alone. Considering the possibility that she may be put in a state where she cannot get married, it would be wiser to leave her in the temple. Perhaps you could negotiate with Sylvester, offering him a recipe or two in return for temporary access to one of the castle chefs. I could do that, I asked. There was only a short period of time between now and spring prayer. He would rejoice at the opportunity to acquire a new recipe or two at so little of a cost. I ultimately followed this advice and decided to leave Ella at the temple. The less danger she was in, the better. I informed her she was going to stay behind, then had Freya and the others prepare my things. Farewell, Lady Rosamund, we await your safe return. May we meet again at spring prayer. After seeing my farewells, I soared through the sky on my way to the castle, riding in Leslie with Rosina and my luggage. Welcome back, my lady. My retainers welcomed me upon my return with Riarda at the lead. The guard knights exchanged places with Daniel and Angelica, who had earned themselves a break. What have you learned in my absence? I asked. I wish for a report on what has happened in the castle. It seemed that Cornelius, Lenore, and Brunhilde, all of whom were related to Count Leisgang, had been called by their parents and other family members, who had interrogated them all about the situation. They had ultimately managed to calm even the most outraged of nobles by conveying that I had no intention of becoming the next Ob to begin with, and that this wasn't a marriage I was being forced into. I heard from Lampret that Lord Wilfrid is exceedingly depressed at the moment. The nobles are insulting him, saying that he is forcing his way to the Ob's seat despite his criminal history by exploiting your reputation as a saint, Cornelius said. Riarda grimaced. Please cheer up, my boy Wilfrid. Help him get through this. You are engaged to him after all, my lady. I find myself unmoved, Hartmut said. It is the truth that Lord Wilfrid committed a crime that should not be forgotten, and also that he is exploiting the Leisgang's support for Lady Rosamund to regain the political capital that he lost committing such crime. He knew before accepting the engagement that he would receive such fair and accurate criticism, and if, for whatever reason, he did not, then he was simply being too naive. It was a harsh perspective that was likely shared by most nobles, or rather most Leisgang nobles. Riarda, in contrast, saw the situation through much more forgiving eyes. That was to be expected, considering she had served Sylvester for such a long time and had known Wilfrid since his birth. The previous Count Leisgang's beloved daughter had been disrespected after he had allowed her to wed the Archduke candidate set to become the next Archduke. Despite having been wed as the first wife, the budding in of Lady Gabriel of Ehrenbach had knocked her down to second wife. On top of that, the Archduke candidate had been removed from the candidacy for fear of causing discord throughout the duchy, thus becoming Count Groschel. At the same time, the reigning Archduke had instructed Count Leisgang to wed his youngest daughter to Bonifacius to bring back order to the duchy. Bonifacius, however, had shown no attachment to the Archduke's seat and actively surrendered it to his younger brother. The younger brother in question had taken as his wife Veronica, the daughter of Lady Gabriel, who ended up mistreating the previous Count Leisgang's grandchildren. The Guy, boasting the most profitable land, was slowly being pushed further and further away from the center of power. The months and years he spent enduring this humiliating abuse were long and painful, and in the end he felt as though he had brought shame to his ancestors. As far as Hartmut was concerned, there was absolutely no chance that they would ever accept Wilfrid, who had been raised by Veronica. Someone who cannot endure criticisms and does not strive to prove they are superior is not suited to become Ob, Hartmut concluded. For as long as he is due to wed Lady Rosamund, he must strive to be fit to stand beside her. As things currently stand, he will be an embarrassment. Hartmut, that is enough, I said. Predicting criticism is not always enough to maintain calm when receiving it. What matters is what Wilfrid does next. Although, more importantly, has Count Leisgang truly given up? Judging by the fact he remained in the castle for as long as possible, it does not seem to me that he has. Brunhilde, who had been asked to check up on great-grandfather as his relative, stepped forward to explain. Lenore and I were invited to visit him, and while there, we were asked endlessly about your taste and preference, Lady Rosamund. After that, he expressed the concern that you were being threatened by the archducal couple to not become the next Ob, just as Lady Veronica had abused Lord Ferdinand to prevent him. Brunhilde had firmly rejected the idea and emphasized that I was on good terms with the archducal couple. Lenore, as Count Leisgang's niece, had likewise conveyed that I did not wish to become the next Ob. When I informed him that you were not used to noble society due to your temple upbringing and that you have no intention of becoming the next Ob, he was exceedingly moved. He was moved, I asked, confused. It was hard to imagine such a response about me being raised in the temple, considering how it was seen by most nobles. This is something Father told me, but it seems that your absolute perfection astounds him, Hartmut said. You have an ideal bloodline, an immense mana capacity, and a record of impressive accomplishments despite the circumstances of your birth. He said that no one in history has been more deserving of the title of saint. How should I say this? Your reputation as a saint has spread much more rapidly thanks to the previous Count Leisgang's efforts. Lenore smiled upon hearing this, not because she was pleased, but because she was utterly exhausted knowing that her efforts to convince him had been for nothing. It seems he will be supporting you with all that he has, so that you will not need to worry about your upbringing. We refused for your sake many times, saying that this was not what you wished for. But great-grandfather is hard of hearing, and thus very skilled at picking up only what he wishes to hear in these discussions. It's therefore impossible to say what he heard and what he didn't. Great-grandfather! My head started to hurt as I realized he was continuing to scheme in the shadows for my sake. Oh no. Once my retainers finished reporting what they had learned, Hartman brought me several stacks of documents. These are from the Royal Academy's dormitory, from when the Royal Academy's dormitory was remodeled, he said, and those are from when the castle and the nobles' quarter were remodeled. It seemed that the documents had been collected after Elvira received my message. She had compiled a team of scholars which naturally consisted of Hartman and Feline, as well as Wilfrid's and Charlotte's scholars. They had worked together to pore over old documents and find everything that was relevant to this remodeling. Thank you. I shall share my documents as well, then. Here are records of my meeting with the Gilberta Company and records of my meeting with the Gutenbergs. I would like for them to be delivered to Elvira. Hartman, I ask that you organize the information relevant to printing and the lower city infrastructure, while Feline, I ask that you organize the information relevant to dyeing. Fran had written the records for his reports to Ferdinand, and so he had described the entire flow of the meeting. I passed the documents to Hartman and Feline in turn, requesting that they cut out only the relevant parts from within. Hartman flipped through the pages and then furrowed his brow slightly. Did a scholar of yours in the temple write these? Yes, they were written by my attendant Fran. In the temple, attendants do scholar work as well. Fran and Zom served Lord Ferdinand as his attendant before they served me, and they are well trained, so you can no doubt tell from these documents. Hartman flipped back to the front of the document and started going through them again, this time with a more serious look in his eyes. Indeed, I never would have expected a grey priest of the temple to be this skilled, he said. Feline looked my way after hearing the phrase Grey Priest of the Temple. Her worried expression made it clear that she wanted to ask about Conrad, so I smiled to ease her worries. Feline, Conrad is doing quite well. He is smiling more often and eats his fill every day. I went to see him in the orphanage myself and found that he has made a friend his age, and that he is learning to read and do math. Feline clasped a hand against her chest with relief, but then she blinked in surprise. Lady Rosamine, what do you mean by that? Conrad is learning to read and do math? My orphanage has full sets of playing cards, and picture books, so children learn to read and do math even before their baptism. Thus, Conrad is being taught to do both by the other orphans. Feline widened her eyes in stunned silence, while Hartman likewise turned my way, looking surprised. Lady Rosamine, if the children in the orphanage know how to read and write before their baptism due to these learning implements, wouldn't that mean they are receiving better education than lay noble children? Hartman asked. Feline nodded repeatedly in agreement, having barely been able to read or write following her baptism. He internally compared the orphanage children to those in the castle's playroom. I don't know exactly what kind of education normal nobles receive, but I believe they are as well educated and well-mannered as men noble children, save for matters related to mana. That said, no precise comparison can be made since their studies and future prospects following their baptisms are so dissimilar. I had made the card and playing cards for the orphans to begin with, and it was only because Sylvester had been impressed with their results that when he did his tour, that they ended up being used in the castle playroom. There was nothing strange about the orphans who had been using them first being able to read and write and do math. Or so I thought, but apparently nobles didn't think that orphans were capable of an education at all, even when they had access to the same resources. If not for the taboo of the temple, I would suggest we host a classroom to educate lay noble children at a low cost, but that seems still too hard to implement. I am postponing my plans for a temple classroom for later. A temple classroom? I plan to one day teach all commoners to read and write and do math. Although I am speaking 10, perhaps 20 years in the future, I said, glancing down at the documents in front of me while explaining my long-term hopes. At the bottom of the paper I was reading was a calculation detailing how much time and mana it would take to remodel the lower city. Mana would probably be a bit tight for a few years, but it's not impossible. Lady Rosamine, what is this dyeing? Feline asked. I glanced back up. They are methods that used to exist in Airfest. I learned of them when discussing the purchasing of multicolored cloth for Swartz and Weiss's outfits with the Gilberta Company. They will be consulting with dyeing workshops to see if these old methods can be revived. Such was the cover story we had gone with. I explained tie-dyeing and resist dyeing to Feline, but since she didn't know what they looked like by practice, it didn't mean much to her. It was Riarda who reacted to them. I'm tie-dyeing and resist dyeing. How nostalgic, she said. You're familiar with them, Riarda? They were in fashion when I was a little girl. I may even have a few outfits dyed in that style, though I will need to search my closet at home. It seemed that the nobles tended not to throw away sentimental clothes, or clothes given to them by the ones they served. This was an unexpected place to learn about old dyeing methods. I would like to see what manner of cloth was produced with these old dyeing methods, I said. Please just show me them when you have the time. Yes, certainly. Brunhilde let out a dissatisfied noise at our promise. What is the point in such old things, she asked. I think it would be best for you to use your time inventing new trends, not falling back on old ones. My goal is to create a new dyeing method using old techniques. Whether the results are worth it will depend on the skill of the craftspeople and our eye for fashion. Will you assist me in creating trends, Brunhilde, not just spreading them? You wish for me to make a trend alongside you, Brunhilde asked, her eyes widening as if that thought had never occurred to her. She had only ever focused on finding good things and spreading them to push trends, but since Florencia and Elvira, among others, were superior to her in both age and fashion, she had never even considered creating a trend herself. I have faith in your social acumen, Brunhilde. You definitely chose the pound cake and tea to be given to Lady Eglantine, and the scents of the Rinsham, too. I believe you will be able to select from a series of dyeing cloths what will be most liked by noblewomen. Brunhilde gave a proud smile and nodded, her amber eyes developing a strong light now that she had the goal of creating a new trend from the ground up. I will select the most suitable cloth for you, Lady Rosamund. I would very much like to start a new trend with you. Ooh, here we go, but that's going to have to wait. I will see you all in the next one.